how to stop feeling lonely and isolated. Hey, thank you for clicking this video. First thing, I hear you, I see you. This question came in, and in this video, I'm going to give you 2 reasons why this is important to me, and I'm going to give you 4 tips, 4 guides from my research and work to help pull yourself out of isolation. From research projects in schools to teaching the outcomes in conferences, it's time to bring the skills home to you. This is the Under Pressure Project. I've learned that one of the most universal and dangerous experiences we can have is something called mental isolation. And what this means is that we feel alone in our mind, that somehow we are diminished, flawed, or excluded. And after seeing the heart and soul of so many students, so many professionals, so many people, this is what we need to heal. Like when you tell me you're feeling lonely or isolated, I go to, wait just a second. This doesn't necessarily mean that you are physically alone. A lot of times it means that we're looking around and how we're taking things in. We feel like we are less than, we feel diminished, we feel flawed somehow, and sometimes we feel like excluded. Maybe it's the way someone's communicating to us. Maybe it is our social circles or lack of social circles. So this is what we need to heal. This is so important to me because I have read responses of people just like you who are struggling and looking for answers. Loneliness and isolation are really important topics to heal and to work through. There are 2 reasons why this is important to me. A lot of times, like you listen to a researcher or some expert and you're like, there's no empathy here. Like they don't even understand. And I want you to understand why this is important that I talk about. I moved a lot growing up. I don't think I lived anywhere more than like 4 years. I went to 2 different high schools. I went to high school in Louisiana and Wyoming. Okay, I know they're very different. But I know what it's like to be alone. I know what it's like to go somewhere new, not know anyone previously, and to walk in. Lunchtime is the scariest thing on the planet when you are new somewhere. And so I know what it's like to be that kid that is alone or that feels alone, okay? Now, another reason this is so important to me is I'm a researcher. I am doing work in the Under Pressure Project. That's what we call my work. And the reason it's called that is it's based on an actual study that was done with 572 high school students with open-ended questions that I sorted through every single one. So I've sorted through just the heart and soul of students. People like me, people like you. I researched 572 students and asked them the biggest struggles that they were facing. What were their biggest pressures? And I heard a lot of their pressures. I heard a lot of things that they were struggling with, how they were struggling with friends, why they were struggling with friends. I listened to their pressures. One of the top overall pressures listed was the pressure to be someone. A lot of it was achievement based. And the top solution for getting through pressure was actually to develop a support network. Now, after this research project, it took me another 8 years where I couldn't stop looking for the patterns. There are patterns here. One thing that we had in common in every piece of data there was, every story, one thing we saw in common with every pressure, that it's something called mental isolation. And when I say mental isolation, it's those times when you feel surrounded by people, but you still feel alone. You know, it's the times, and I like to call it like this. This is how I define it. It's the times where you feel diminished, flawed, or excluded. And it's a very dangerous place to be. So I want to talk through this today. I want to give you 4 tips that can help pull ourselves out of isolation. Because here's tip number 1. I want you to see the benefit of letting people in. So many times when we're struggling, I see a lot of instances where we're the ones that have a wall up and we keep a wall up, and then we keep saying over and over why and how that we are being excluded by people and isolated by people. So what I mean by this, I'm going to give you a story actually. There was a time when I was a young mom and I was at the grocery store with 3 little kids. And I remember standing at the checkout line and seeing the bagger with his kind eyes. And he asked, "Can I help you out?" And I knew my answer. I knew what I was going to say. I looked at him and I said, "No, I've got this." Okay? I didn't got this. I could see it in his eyes. He really was like, "I don't think you do." And I didn't, because my kids were like reenacting scenes from the Titanic on the end of the cart. Okay? I needed help. And someone was offering and I didn't let them in. I was at a conference once where a woman came up to me after and she said, "You know, Karen, sometimes I think we isolate ourselves." And I wondered why, because it's true. When she said that, I thought that is accurate, because there are times we are putting that wall up ourselves. We don't want to let people in. I think we fear, like, if we let people in, what if they see the real us and it exposes us? And what if they don't like us? And we get rejected, and that doesn't feel good. But what are the benefits of letting people in? Wait, I got to keep going with that though. Why do we isolate ourselves? Sometimes we don't know how to let people in. Sometimes there's very real trauma, very, very real situations of trauma where there's reasons. There are just reasons why we aren't doing this. That's maybe a little tender, maybe not for this video. But we are also taught to be strong. Like, we're taught to say, like, I've got this, and I'm not supposed to let people in. And so sometimes when we're struggling with something, we're taught that maybe we shouldn't talk about it. We shouldn't go for help. We shouldn't let people in. So what can we do to better let people in our lives? Maybe we're the ones that extend the invitation for what we need. Do you realize that it is not your boss's job, not your PTA president's job? It is not your friend. It's not the principal's job. It is not the people around you's job to look around and say, like, "Oh, she's isolated." It's your job. It's our job. It's our job to speak up for our needs and represent what we need. Because most of the time we're going to find that the other people around us, including our bosses, including our PTA presidents, sometimes they feel just as isolated. They feel just as diminished, flawed, or excluded as you do. And so they're in the same spot as you are. And so what do? We've got to learn to start letting people in. So that's what leads to tip number 2, is be the one to make the invitation. You ask for what you need. Now, if you're watching this video in order to help someone else, one of the things you can do is ask specific questions. Back to the grocery store conversation. If that bagger wanted to help me, instead of saying, "Can I help you out?" if he were to get more specific and say, "I would like to help you to the car, would that be okay?" I would have said yes. Sometimes we need people in our lives to ask more specific questions. I think together around each other, sometimes we don't know how to communicate. We don't know the right questions to ask. So on either side, if you're trying to help someone, ask specific questions, and that can help someone who's struggling to better let them in. Tip number 3 is to redefine what stranger etiquette means. So many times we're taught not to like address people or talk to people or look at people. Like, we just go about our lives and we keep going. I was at the grocery store very recently where I watched a woman, and this is during COVID, and so we're masked up and we're told to stay far apart. I watched a woman fall in the produce section. Here we are, just a bunch of strangers at their grocery store, and I watched a woman rush over, help her up. Like, we were even supposed to be 6 feet apart right now, but no, like they were wearing masks, but like, she scooped her up as a stranger. She helped her get new produce, and suddenly strangers were so much more than strangers. Like, they were people that cared about one another. I think sometimes we have these protocols where we're supposed to just like go about life. Like, I was at a baseball game even. I was at my kid's baseball game a couple years back, and there were people I didn't know, and so we set our lawn chair down, we look ahead, we watch the ball game, and we don't acknowledge people, because we're honoring each other's space. And I am a big fan of honoring space. Like, I love it when we honor each other's space, but sometimes are we missing out on a relationship because we're trying so hard to give each other space? One summer, my family was at a hotel pool, this outdoor hotel pool. We had the entire pool to ourselves. And my kids were splashing and jumping, and they were like cannonballing into the pool, having the time of their lives. So something happened. A new family walked in, and I realized, I looked at my husband, I said, oh no, like, we have not talked about stranger hotel pool etiquette, meaning that I enjoy my corner of the pool and you enjoy your corner of the pool, and we don't make eye contact, especially in bathing suits, right? So here are my kids though, they're in the thick of playing. And what they did is they went up to this family and they said, hey, do you want to play? And the kids just looked at them because these kids, they knew stranger etiquette, right? They didn't say anything because they're like, we're not supposed to talk to each other. And I realized that I didn't need to teach my kids about stranger etiquette because life taught them about stranger etiquette when the kids didn't want to play and they didn't want to address them, which is fine. I think it's okay to honor each other's space, but what are we missing out on? I think we can cannonball together maybe a little bit more than we do. I mean, we can honor that space, but still, what are we missing out on because we're sitting at the ball game trying not to make eye contact with the person next to us? What are we missing out on when we're in the grocery store checkout line on our phone instead of seeing that woman, the woman that just fell in the produce aisle who needs someone else? There are people all around us who are strangers, but they are going through similar things that you are. So what if we redefine what stranger etiquette is? Tip number 4 is to spark understanding. Sometimes we feel isolated because we don't feel understood. So if we already know that it's not like our boss's job to make sure we are connected, it's not our PTA president's job to make sure we feel connected. If it's our job, like, what are we doing to help people understand? So many times we sit behind a screen and we're upset and we're concerned about things and we're feeling like nobody understands us. But I want to ask, what have you done and what can you do to help people to understand what you're going through? And now I'm going to push you just a little bit more here. What have you done to be understanding? What about the situations that are around you? When was the last time you were like, how can I understand this better? Because the more understanding all around that we generate, the more it pulls us out of isolation. Look, mental isolation is one of the most universal and dangerous experiences we can have, because when we're in this isolated place, it heightens everything else. So we want to be understanding, but at the same time, like, how can we be the one that understands? How can we make some of those invitations to have our needs met, but also to be meeting other people's needs as well? This is a difficult time. I realize I'm filming this at the start of 2021 where things are still a struggle. I realize if you're asking about loneliness and isolation, maybe some of these tips you want to go even deeper still. And I hear you. I hear you that sometimes, like, we just plain don't have people in our lives. We've got to be the ones to stop finger pointing at all the ways people are leaving us out and find ways to represent and speak up for what we need. And sometimes that also means that we stop and see what others need as well. So, hey, we've got more videos for you. I would love it if you would hit the subscribe button and let's keep the conversation going. I'm cheering you on, sending you a lot of love. You are not diminished, you are not flawed, and you are not excluded. You matter.